Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, Governor Rauner is joined by Representatives Kwame Raoul and Mary Flowers, among others, as they urge bipartisan action to reduce criminal recidivism. Then in about 30 minutes from now, State Treasurer Mike Frericks holds a press conference along with lawmakers to explain why the state is cutting business ties with Wells Fargo. Then in about 55 minutes from now, we talk with Don Schaeffer, the Executive Vice President of Midwest Truckers Association, about a recent trip he made to Cuba, about talks to open up business with the country. Mr. Schaeffer remarks on the country's failing infrastructure and whether Cuba is quite yet ready to accept businesses from states like Illinois. And finally, in about 1 hour and 20 minutes from now, U.S. Representative Rodney Davis talks about the need to update mass transit in the capital city as well as throughout Illinois. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm David Yepsen, Director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. Here at the Illinois State Capitol is where Paul Simon spent much of his public career, as a member of the Illinois House, the Illinois Senate, and as Lieutenant Governor. It was a career that led him to the United States Senate and a run for the White House. One of Paul's living legacies is the institute that now bears his name. He believed that citizens needed to be informed and engaged. That's why the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute works to develop solutions to some of the most difficult challenges in the public policy arena, like ethical conduct in government, fair drawing of legislative district lines, and responsible citizenship. Paul Simon's belief in good government and citizen involvement is why he joined with former Governor Jim Edgar to help launch the Illinois Channel. Today, the Illinois Channel programming is seen from Carbondale to Chicago, from Quincy to Champaign. It connects citizens across Illinois to events here at the Capitol. Perhaps Paul said it best when he told a gathering of lawmakers back in 2000 why Illinois needed an Illinois Channel.
The whole premise of a democracy is that we're going to be reasonably well informed as a public in order to make decisions. And this adds to the base of democracy.
I'm David Yepsen, Director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. I watch the Illinois Channel, and I hope you do too. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Chicago, Governor Rauner is joined by Representatives Kwame Raoul and Mary Flowers, among others, as they urge bipartisan action to reduce criminal recidivism. This runs about 30 minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm Pam Rodriguez, President and CEO of TASK, Treatment Alternatives for Safe Communities. I want to welcome you all here. I want to welcome our very distinguished guests, who you'll be hearing from in a minute. I just want to say one thing about TASK, for those of you who don't know. For the last 40 years, we've been working at the intersection of criminal justice and behavioral health with a focus on increasing rehabilitation for people who get involved in the justice system, recovery, and reducing recidivism at the same time. And that's a part of what we're talking about here today. I'm also a member of the commission, and we are honored to be hosting a commission meeting downstairs right after this event. Now, I want to especially thank Governor Rauner for being here and choosing this location as a site for this press conference. And without further ado, Benita.
Hello, good morning. My name is Benita. First of all, I want to thank the governor. I want to thank the governor for giving people an opportunity that's coming from incarceration to have a state ID. It is very important that you have a state ID in order to get a job, in order to get a place to stay. And In order to do that, it's a great thing. And I also want to thank Miss Nellie because she's the one who helped me get mine. I'm at a place called A Safe Haven. It helps you transpire, it helps you sustain in society. And this will be a great thing because it's hard out there to get a state ID when you coming from being in incarceration from having nothing. And it's a great thing, and I want to thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm State Representative Mary Flowers, and I'm the sponsor of House Bill 3368, one of the sponsors. And I'm looking forward to working with the governor and others on this bill. As it was stated, that having a state ID is very important, but as this current bill is written, it is flawed because it says upon the release of the person, that person will have a state ID. And so that we're given the impression that the Secretary of State's office is inside the prison or the juvenile center taking the pictures, and that's not so. So that's one part of it that needs to be corrected. And the other portion of the bill speaks to, my memory is fading me now, but there's a couple flaws in the bill that needs to be corrected, and I want to thank the governor for bringing this to our attention. I want to thank the governor for putting forth the commission, and I believe that we should also have a time certain when people are incarcerated before they are released that they should have their state ID. They should have their Medicaid card. And right now, current law says that they should have a Medicaid card, and that's not being done. So we have to make sure that when we pass this legislation, that it is being implemented. So there's a couple things that we need to do to make sure that we pass the bill, making sure that everyone have a state ID, number one, make sure they have their Medicaid card, number two, before they are released. Thank you.
Well, it's always something following Representative Flowers. I don't know how to follow, but I too want to thank the governor, and not just on this bill, but on tackling, on helping lead us on tackling kind of age-old obstacles. Some of them very simple obstacles to people who have paid their debt. To try to make a better life for themselves, and obtaining an ID, which is something that seems so fundamental, is something that has been an obstacle for a long time. We've got much more work to do on creating pathways to returning to good citizenship, and we're working away at that work. In fact, we'll continue working after this conference today in this building today as the Criminal Justice Reform Commission that the governor created days after he came into office. I recall a conversation I had with the governor just days after he was elected, and we had a good conversation about criminal justice reform and how we could work in a bipartisan manner at tackling some of the issues, and we've been doing so. It's not easy work. It's not easy work figuring it all out and tackling the politics that will sometimes stand in the way, but Governor Rauner is taking it on, and I'm glad to be his partner in it. Governor Rauner.
Yes. My name is Kirkland Atkins. I'm just grateful to have a place like Safe Haven to go to get my ID, help me to get it. And coming out of the criminal justice system is hard. It's like obstacles that you have to go through to get it. Sometimes they want you to get a DNA, transcripts from schools, and back in the day, sometimes they don't have that. So I'm thankful for this program they're having. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you again to everybody for joining us today. This is an important day, step in a process. I would like to give special thanks to Representative Flowers and to Senator Raoul for their leadership around justice reform and sentencing reform for the state of Illinois. They have been strong proponents for a more fair, equitable system that actually helps people lead productive lives and keep our citizens, our families safe while doing it. I want to thank them very strongly. It was an honor for me, in conjunction with them and others, to form a commission on Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform. That commission has met, I think, about 20 times now. They're meeting again this afternoon. They came out with their first round of recommendations at the end of last year. They're going to come out with another round of recommendations at the end of this year. And this is a process to improve our system so it produces better results for the people of Illinois. The goal is keep people safer, reduce overall crime, punish violent offenders in an appropriate way, but make sure we're not only about punishment, that we are about second chances, we are about reducing repeat offenses, reduce recidivism, and we help those who paid their debt to society come back and lead productive lives. They get help with mental health treatment, get help with job training, get help with addiction recovery. Without those services, the odds are repeat offenses will occur. We need to change our system. It can not only focus on punishment, it needs to also involve rehabilitation. And that's what this is really about. This particular bill, very important. The legislature has introduced, I believe, 4 bills coming out of the recommendations of the Commission on Justice Reform. This one bill in particular is very important. It has passed the Senate unanimously. Let me repeat that. It has passed the Senate unanimously, but it has been held up in the House Rules Committee. When I am here today, and all of us are here asking that the House pass this bill as soon as possible. It is so hard for folks coming out of prison to get reestablished as productive citizens. It has challenges, tremendous challenges. One challenge we can knock down and put away so it's not a challenge anymore is the ability to have an ID. An ID is necessary to try to get an apartment lease, to try to set up a bank account or get a credit application, for a job application, for health care treatment. You need an ID. And right now, the way it's set up in Illinois, very difficult for an offender who's leaving prison to get an ID. This shouldn't be the case. And this bill allows the Secretary of State, as a Secretary of State, work with the Department of Corrections to make sure everybody coming out of prison has an ID for 90 days, lets them get established, and then sets them up to get a permanent long-term ID while they can get themselves established in the rest of their lives. So they can work on jobs, work on health care, work on a place to live and stay, and all the essentials of life. This bill is very important. It should have passed the House already, and we're asking as soon as the General Assembly comes back to the House would pass this bill. And again, we want to continue the process of trying to improve our justice system, reduce the overall prison population, give second chances and more rehabilitation for nonviolent offenders who need help with their addiction, mental health issues, et cetera. This is a great step in that direction. I'd like to thank everyone here for their work in this effort, and we'll continue the effort going forward on a bipartisan basis. Any questions?
So why hasn't it? I mean, it went to House Rules like 5 months ago or something. Why hasn't it gone anywhere?
I don't know the answer. I don't know, Mary, do you have a comment?
Well, again, it was after we reviewed the bill, and it was after session. Unfortunately, there was a lot of things going on with the governor's office and the speaker's office at the end of session. So this one just kind of got under the radar a little bit. But in the meantime, if you review the bill, you'll see that there's a couple technicalities that needs to be addressed in the bill, because current law says if a person is getting out of jail, the first thing they have to do is go and get their school record. But even if you got your school record, you would need an ID. And I want to say that this is not the first time this bill has been passed. I think it was in 2010, this bill passed once before, but the ID that's given by the Department of Correction is not recognized at the other state facilities as a state ID. So that's a problem. So we have to figure out how, and it shouldn't really be a problem because the Secretary of State's office is mobile and it can come to the Department of Corrections or the Juvenile Center. And we just have to have a date certain. That's the reason why we need to have a plan in place in regards to, we know when these people are going to be let out of these facilities. So if it's 6 months prior, we start making a plan as far as their release out of the institution and their reentry into the community. And they will need the necessary papers for their medical records and their ID.
Representative, what is the approximate universe of men and women every year who are released and need this?
Oh, whatever the population is of people being released, and I have no idea what that may be, but each and every last one of them, because of what may have happened, their homes or their families may have moved, or they may have lost their paperwork because of the length of time that they've been incarcerated. But this is the state of Illinois. And so while they're incarcerated, you know exactly who they are because you have their fingerprints and you have their ID. We can help them. If we want to help them to become responsible citizens upon their release, we could help them get their birth certificates. We could help them to get their medical records, their ID, whatever it is, while they are there. And then upon their release, they could take that ID and go and apply for a job, go and apply for housing.
What you're saying is one big chunk of state government isn't communicating well with another big chunk of state government. You got Department of Corrections and the Secretary of State's office.
And the Department of Human Services, absolutely, to deal with Medicaid, absolutely. And so, again, that's the reason why there needs to be a plan and process, and I hope that's a part of the Governor's Commission to put forth a plan for the inmates that we know are going to be released from these institutions and to make sure that they have a proper place.
So three-part question for you and Senator Raul and Governor Rauner. Three parts.
Which part do we each get?
You're a smart guy. So, you know, our president said a long time ago, the first urgency of now. You've just been asked about sort of what's the universe. I think there are like 50,000 prisoners in Illinois ballpark. You folks would know better. My guess is in the next few months, 500 of those folks might be coming out being released. I mean, you got a lot of talent. Senator Raul could fix this bill and write it, I'm sure, today in 2 hours. He's a great lawyer. You're a great politician. You got a great governor. I'm in a good mood of giving out compliments to him. So, seriously, you got 500 people who are going to be probably affected in the next few months. Why doesn't the governor call a special session? Sit down in the next week, get a bill that corrects as best as you can all these things, and then give it a shot. There will be some things wrong, but a good chunk of those 500 people will be so much better off because they will have ID. So the sense is, being somewhat cynical, I hear Speaker Madigan may not want to give another feather in his hat, or let Governor Rauner have another feather in his hat. So hold this up for the election, or else the governor and the senator and you can go around the state saying, look what we did, and the speaker doesn't want that to happen.
You are really, because we have worked on many of bills as far as early release and doing the right thing. As I said before, we've passed this legislation. Let me explain. We've passed legislation in regards to ID. The Secretary of State's office did not give the state ID that the average John or Jane Doe would get if they lost their ID. Because the argument that I was given, they cannot authenticate who they say that they are because so many former inmates had previous aliases. But the fact of the matter is that you can prove who they are because you have their fingerprints and you have their identification for however long they may have been incarcerated. They could have done a background check on that. After all, they've had them for a time certain. We have passed legislation to deal with Medicaid. The federal law does not allow you to collect Medicaid or have Medicaid while you are incarcerated. But upon your release, we've made it so that you can get a Medicaid card or an application. That's not being done. That is already the law. So my point to you is not about a power struggle between the speaker and the governor. That's not it. The fact of the matter is the powers to be that we have to get these state agencies together. The Secretary of State office is not housed in the Department of Correction. So somehow, some way, the Secretary of State is going to have to set up a place or a site to come to the Department of Correction, or the Department of Correction will have to set up for a time certain for the people that's going to be released to go to the Secretary of State's office to take this ID. That's all it is.
Senator, your chamber passed it. Could you just step up now and just tell me, could you get this done? Could you get a bill that's good and remedies all the things that Representative Flowers said? You could probably do it in the next 2 hours, seriously. And the governor could call the session and you could get it done this week. So the two of you, could you get it done?
Jeff, you overrate my intelligence.
I understand.
You know, I've been in the legislature for the last 11 years. There's always been bills that are pending in one chamber or the other at the end of a session. The thing is, we're here today coming together saying that this is an initiative that we support on a bipartisan basis. The notion of calling a special session for this, I think there are tons of bills that are incomplete at the end of each session. If the governor were to call a special session for each one of those issues that are important issues, then we'd be spending a lot of taxpayer money unnecessary. I understand that. Jeff, I understand. I've been advocating for some policy changes for years, right? So not just the last few months, for years. We're beginning to work on it on a bipartisan basis, and we're going to continue that work. But the notion of every time there's an unfinished issue, we're going to call for a special session, I think that's ridiculous.
And I just want to say this, I cannot thank the governor enough. Mr. Governor, thank you very much. I appreciate the commission. I appreciate your involvement. I appreciate, we work together. This is a bipartisan issue. There's no one playing games with people's lives here. I have a personal stake here because the people that's released usually come back to my community. I want them to have their driver's license. I want them to have their state ID. I want them to have access to job, education, and opportunities. Believe me, I'll leave no stone unturned to make sure that this gets done during the veto session.
Governor, could this be possibly more important than some of the other bills that didn't get done? So, Senator Rowell says you can't do it for everyone, I understand. Maybe this one, demonstrate what you can do as a governor, your leadership, to get this done in the next week.
This is a very important bill. There are many important bills. Again, I applaud the representative and Senator Raul for their leadership on this. My understanding is that this bill has corrected, because there was an effort to do this, I think 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. And technically, the Secretary of State's office wasn't willing to take the ID generated by the Department of Corrections because it didn't have the right address or a good address to be used. I would have liked to have that be corrected just by good administration process, but it didn't get corrected, and the Secretary of State's office just didn't get them IDs. This bill corrects that, requires it, and I believe it's technically now in compliant with everything. I think it's a good bill, as far as my understanding. Well, if there's some other issue, so be it. It's important, I hope, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to gather today. We want to encourage. There's going to be a lot on people's plates when the General Assembly comes back after the election, and I think we all are making the request, let's make sure this bill passes when they come back.
Governor, if you say this is a good bill now, does that mean you'd be happy if it passed the way it is now?
I would.
Does it have to be amended as Representative Flowers says?
I don't know, Mary and I haven't discussed that. My understanding is what the Senate passed is good as it is. But
and I just want to say, and this, the current bill reads, upon release of the person from the center, they will be given their state ID. That can't happen. Also, the current bill does not say that the person have to apply for their ID. Those are two things that has to be addressed in this legislation.
So those are amendments that have to take place?
Yes, those are two things. Upon release, if you stepped out of jail right now, I'm supposed to, according to the legislation, I'm supposed to give you a state ID. I can't do that. You have not applied, number one, and the Secretary of State's office have not taken your picture and given you.
They can't just come over and do it on their own. They need a bill that says how to do this.
Well,
Secretary of State, Jesse.
I would imagine that there should be a law that would require or have access for the Secretary of State's office to come into the Department of Correction or the Department of Correction to go to take, because they're still inmates at the time.
Jesse's been there for 20 years.
And he's been there longer than 20 years, because I've been there for 30 years.
All right, let's, yeah. We're going to do off topic over here, but anything related to criminal justice reform, let's talk about here.
Governor, Representative Bradley attacked.
We're going to do off topic off to the side.
Well, this is criminal justice. That's criminal justice.
So, I mean, that was a direct attack on what you're trying to do here, what your commission is doing. What do you say to that and other law and order?
Politics and campaigning is its own process. It's its own. I'm not really going to comment on campaigns. There is a strong bipartisan effort in Illinois to improve our criminal justice system and make it more fair and make it more balanced and give those who deserve a second chance a real opportunity for a second chance.
But he's not alone. There's a backlash against some of these reform efforts. How do you overcome that?
I think there's bipartisan, strong agreement that we need to improve our system, that our system's not working, and it needs to be reformed. And that's what all our elected officials are concentrating on through this commission to try to bring about improvements in the system.
Any other topics?
Governor, you mentioned adequately punishing violent offenders as far as criminal justice. We hear from the mayor and police all the time here that needs to be strengthened in terms of men's sentencing and also gun control. Is that part of your criminal justice reform?
Well, again, maybe Senator Rowe might want to comment. There are some efforts around to maybe try to strengthen certain gun-related crimes. I'm certainly a believer that violent offenders should be punished and kept away from innocent people. And I believe the senator has been working on legislation for a time. I don't know if Senator would like to comment.
Sure. And a comment to a previous question, I think we need your help too, right? So I think we're all in this together with regards to moving criminal justice reform forward, but I think we need the help of journalists to write that these policies are strong policies. So notwithstanding what happens in politics, we overcome that because good policy should move forward, notwithstanding what happens in campaigns. With regards to the gun violence we're experiencing, we're examining data currently to make sure that that our response is one that is consistent with the data on current sentencing. What we're exploring is not changing the parameters of the sentences that currently exist. So previous proposals sought to just bump up the minimums on all of the gun possession offenses and add a layer of truth in sentencing on top of that. We're not suggesting to do that at all. We're looking at the existing sentencing ranges and trying to explore the idea of providing presumptive guidelines to judges when faced with a repeat gun offender. So,
apropos of gun violence, we've been told that we can stop it in a week if we started stop and frisk. Good idea, bad idea?
Well, consider your source.
What's your view of that?
I think it's an application as we've seen it in other places. It's been unconstitutionally applied, where you're stopping. I think the statistics of the returns on the number of people stopped, as well as the disproportionate impact on African American males in particular. I think that's not the country that we're supposed to live in. You know, that I could be walking down the street in blue jeans and a baseball cap and be subjected to something that somebody else of another hue in the same attire would not be. That's unconstitutional.
Bill Bratton started the stop and frisk, as you may know, in the 90s under Giuliani. It worked very effectively there. He brought it out to Los Angeles. It worked very effectively
I don't care if Martin Luther King started stop and frisk. I don't care if Martin Luther King would have started.
Empirical data that shows it works very effectively. You might want to look at Heather McDonald's new book called The War on Cops and not dismiss these things so easily as unconstitutional. There was a district court judge who upheld.
You and I can look at that as sometimes.
I mean, it's not quite as straightforward as you, and I know you're smarter than that. It's not quite as straightforward.
I appreciate your compliments.
Do we have any other on-title questions? All right, we'll do off-topic after the set. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Next from Chicago, State Treasurer Mike Frerichs holds a press conference along with lawmakers to explain why the state is cutting business ties with Wells Fargo. This runs about 25 minutes.
Good morning. Today, I am suspending $30 billion in investment activity from Wells Fargo and the use of the company as a broker-dealer for the purchase of investments. Wells Fargo's predatory and illegal banking practices require a strong response. As the state's chief banking officer and chief investment officer, I'm responsible for overseeing nearly $1 trillion in annual investment activity. It is my duty to execute these responsibilities in a highly professional and ethical manner, always striving for transparency, integrity, and preservation of public trust. My role to safeguard the state's money is something I take very seriously and will continue to shine a light on unfair, illegal actions by companies. According to the consent order issued by the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Wells Fargo took advantage of consumers by secretly opening over 2 million unauthorized deposit, credit card, and debit card and online banking accounts from 2011 to 2015. During this 5-year period, the company extracted millions of dollars in fraudulent fees and damaged many customers' credit records, forcing them to pay higher interest rates on loans. Their illegal actions to meet sales targets and compensation incentives is downright shameful. And it gets worse. The $1.9 trillion financial services company also violated the federal rights of active duty service members. Last week, the U.S. Justice Department penalized Wells Fargo for the unlawful repossessions of vehicles of members of our armed services without giving them or the courts the proper notice, while also charging more than the 6% interest rate limitation. With the dramatic failure of corporate controls and oversight, I have also ordered an audit to determine if, in addition to their other illegal activities, Wells Fargo violated Illinois' unclaimed property laws. It's important that we make sure Illinois' consumers get what may be owed to them. Similar audits of life insurance companies have identified more than $550 million that should have been paid to beneficiaries here in Illinois. Earlier this year, due to our steadfast commitment to get consumers what is owed to them, Radio Shack surrendered $140,000 in uncashed rebates owed to more than 5,000 Illinois residents. And Sprint paid $2.3 million and provided the names of 32,000 customers who were still owed rebates. According to Wells Fargo, they serve about 1 in 3 households in the United States. Now, that's a lot of people that have trusted them for decades in their banking, insurance, and investment needs. But this isn't the first time that Illinois has brought forth issues concerning Wells Fargo. In 2012, thanks to Attorney General Lisa Madigan and the U.S. Department of Justice, a lawsuit against Wells Fargo over discriminatory lending practices resulted in $175 million joint settlement for consumers. At the time of the settlement, it was estimated more than 3,000 Illinois borrowers were victims of discrimination by Wells Fargo brokers. The settlement provided restitution for African American and Latino borrowers who were steered into risky subprime loans at a higher rate for their loans than white borrowers. Wells Fargo is a big financial player in Illinois, and I hope to send the message that their unscrupulous practices are not welcomed and will not be tolerated. In addition to the suspension of investment activity, All existing relationships will be put under review to assess contractual terms and obligations. The moratorium on investment activity with Wells Fargo will remain in effect for 1 year. After this period, a reevaluation of Wells Fargo corporate governance practices will be conducted. I want to thank you very much for being here today. I want to thank the people who have joined me here today in front of the podium. I want to give them an opportunity to come up and speak. First up is my former colleague, Senator Jackie Collins. She is the chairman of the Senate Financial Institutions Committee and has been a longtime champion of consumers in the state of Illinois. Senator Collins.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is spelled Jacqueline, Jacqueline, Collins, Collins. I am proud today to stand with Treasurer Ferrix, and I want to commend him for his leadership in fighting for Illinois consumers against corporate fraud and greed. What is even more outrageous than the conduct recently brought to light is the fact that we've heard this story before. Financial institutions claiming they're too big to be held accountable, while low-level employees take the blame, high-level executives evade the consequences, and working families suffer from the misdeeds of others. We find it disheartening and infuriating that Wells Fargo continued to quietly but blatantly defraud its customers, even in this new era of stricter oversight. Treasurer Ferrix has made the right decision, not allowing the investment of its taxpayers' hard-earned money to enable corporate irresponsibility on the backs of the poor and the middle class. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Collins. We also are joined by a champion in the Illinois House of Representatives, a fighter for consumers, and Representative Will Guzzardi.
Thank you, Treasurer. Good morning. My name is Will Guzzardi, Guzzardi. I'm State Representative of the 39th District on the northwest side of Chicago. I'm also Treasurer Ferrix's body double, in case you guys are doing interviews later. I want to thank the Treasurer for bringing us all here today and for taking this bold and important action. Wells Fargo's latest fraud is simply a bridge too far. They've been caught discriminating against African American and Latino borrowers. They've been caught discriminating against people with disabilities. This new revelation, frankly, their hand has been caught in the cookie jar one too many times. And the state of Illinois and our taxpayers, we're not going to continue investing in a company that treats low-income and working families this way. I think what Treasurer Ferrix is doing here today is a critically important message that the profit motive of the financial sector in this state is out of control, that they are taking advantage of working people in order to pad corporate bottom lines. And unfortunately, this is symptomatic of a deeper problem in our society, where lower income and middle class families have seen incomes stagnate and cost of living rise. And we're told that simply there's no answer to this problem. While meanwhile, profits for the biggest corporations and the wealth of the very wealthiest individuals continue to grow unchecked. I think we need to restore balance in our society. We need working people to be able to see their incomes rise. We need corporate greed to be checked by a strong hand of government. That's what Treasurer Ferrix is doing here today. That's what we intend to do in the legislature. We've worked closely with Treasurer Ferrix in going after some bad corporate actors so far in my 2 years in the legislature, and I look forward to continuing that cause as we carry forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Guzzardi. As Representative Guzzardi pointed out, a lot of these individuals who were the victims of this are poorer families and senior citizens. And it's important that someone stands up on their behalf. We have a representative from Grassroots Collaborative, Amisha Patel. Amisha?
Good morning. My name is Amisha Patel. That's A-M-I-S-H-A. Last name is P-A-T-E-L. We applaud this action by Treasurer Ferrix. Grassroots Collaborative has been working to take on Wall Street banks for some time now. Wells Fargo and other banks have been defrauding customers without any real consequences for too long. We need more elected officials to step up and say we'll stop doing business with banks that behave illegally or unethically. Wells Fargo defrauded its customers by lying to them about their accounts. They have wrecked employees and customers' lives, but they have also wrecked public institutions as well. Wells Fargo and other big banks like Bank of America have made over $500 million off of toxic interest rate swaps with Chicago public schools. We have these same deals at the state of Illinois as well. So just like banks open secret accounts for customers in order to generate fees, they also have sold these bad deals to taxpayers without telling us about the risks in order to make their millions. Treasurer Ferrix is sending a strong message to banks that if they steal from their customers, they are not welcome in our state. The Treasurer is leading the way by taking economic action. We hope that Governor Rauner will also follow suit and be just as aggressive about holding banks accountable that are in part responsible for wrecking the state's economy and definitely wrecking the lives of low-income families across the state. It's time to end the lack of consequences for Wall Street executives who reap hundreds of millions of dollars while employees, customers, and communities suffer. It's time for us to fight back against the greed that is wrecking working families. It's time for us to tell big banks no more.
Thank you, Amisha. We're also joined today by a representative from Citizen Action Illinois, William McNary. Thank you for being here, William.
Thank you. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is William McNary, MC, capital N-A-R-Y. I'm the co-director of Citizen Action Illinois, and we stand in support of Treasurer Frericks' action to cut Wells Fargo off from billions of investment dollars for defrauding consumers. It's recently obviously come to light that Wells Fargo opened 2 million deposit accounts and credit cards and debit cards and online bank accounts that customers never applied for, which allowed Wells Fargo to earn millions and millions of dollars in fraudulent fees while at the same time demanding customers' credit damaging customers' credit ratings and forcing them to pay higher interest on loans. But let's be clear, this is a bank with a history of discrimination and risky subprime loans to black and Latino borrowers. And in a world where the wealthy, the well-connected, and the well-to-do continue to profit at the misery of others, in a world where billionaires pay no taxes, the people demand accountability. Now, we can't make Wells Fargo CEO John Strump step down and return all of the money that he and his employees made while creating these fake accounts, and we can't make the Department of Justice investigate Wells Fargo CEO John Strump for criminal prosecution. But what we can do is to make sure that consumer taxpayer dollars under the control of the Treasurer's office will not be used to continue to reward the egregious conduct of a serial bank offender ripping off customers. We should be rewarding banks that provide low-interest small business loans in urban and rural areas. We should be rewarding banks that provide mortgage relief to those people whose mortgages are underwater. We should be rewarding those banks who make low-interest loans to those customers who need their homes. And so we applaud Treasurer Frericks in his efforts to send a clear message to Wells Fargo and these corporations that they will not be allowed to profit from Illinois taxpayers if they continue to engage in these egregious anti-consumer practices. Thank you.
Thank you, William. We're also joined by a representative of the Woodstock Institute, Ms. Dory Rand.
Good morning. I'm Dory Rand, D-O-R-Y-R-A-N-D. I'm president of Woodstock Institute. For over 43 years, we've advocated for safe and affordable financial products and services. So we strongly support Treasurer Frericks' decision to pull out from working with Wells Fargo and to try to help refund money to victims of its abuses. It's bad enough that Wells Fargo rewarded aggressive account openings and sales of toxic products like deposit advances and overdrafts that trap consumers in debt. But what made that even worse is the fact that Wells Fargo uses forced arbitration clauses and waivers of class actions in its consumer contracts, so that even when victims of these abuses tried to sue them in court, their cases were thrown out and the violations were allowed to continue for years. So we call on Wells Fargo not only to stop the abusive account openings and the other issues that they were charged with by the CFPB and the OCC and the LA attorney, but to also stop using forced arbitration clauses and class action waivers in its contracts. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for joining me here today, and I think we'll all be willing to take any questions the media might have.
But Treasurer, can you explain the math? I'm not quite sure I understand the $30 billion. We don't even have $30 billion, it seems, to spend on anything.
Yeah, sure. So this is investment activity. We purchase repurchase agreements, commercial paper, other investment instruments of short duration. So this money will turn over frequently in investment activity.
Why is it that Wells Fargo enjoys that? Are they the sole?
It is not exclusively Wells Fargo. We work with many different financial institutions. They're available on our website. I think there are about 25 different companies that are qualified to be working with us on this. So the money will go to other companies who are the lowest bidders.
I still don't get the math of it. I don't get the $30 billion. Explain where the cash is coming from, and you can generate that much activity through Wells Fargo.
So we have over $1 trillion in investment activity over the course of a year. Because if we have, let's say, $10 to invest, some days we'll invest it in a overnight agreement, and that next day you can invest another overnight, and by the end of the week you've had $70 in investment activity over $10 in investments.
Mike?
So over the course of a year, it is reinvested numerous times.
Mike, in dollars, as a result of your action only, how much in fees is Wells Fargo losing?
So Wells Fargo, when they win, they are the lowest bidder, and they determine how much they can take. We're not able to quantify exactly how much is in there, but in $30 billion, it is fair to say this is millions of dollars that will cost them.
Do you have any accounting, like how much you paid Wells Fargo, like last year?
Yeah, last year in terms of investment activity, it was $30 billion.
What did they earn?
About October 1st.
How much you paid Wells Fargo in fees
what did they earn
last
off
year?
Off of that, so we go out to market, and the lowest bidder takes this, gets the work. There are other financial institutions out there that we work with.
I understand that, but
So we don't pay them directly fees, and when we make these and have this investment activity, they build in a few basis points that they make off of this.
So you don't know how much they're making?
No.
Off the state of Illinois?
It's millions of dollars.
I'm still not getting the $30 billion. I totally agree with him. So is that how much Wells Fargo is managing or being the broker-dealer of?
These are broker-dealers. So this is other investment activities that other investments that we are making. They're the broker-dealer, or on their repurchase agreements or commercial paper.
And this $30 billion is all that Wells Fargo is?
This is investments that has been brokered or purchased through Wells Fargo.
And they get
all in all, we've had over about $1 trillion in investment activity over the last year.
Right, and they get a cut of this $30 billion, and you expect that's like millions of dollars?
Yes.
Can you quantify in tens of millions of dollars or a few $1 million?
I mean, it's millions of dollars. I wouldn't say it's tens of millions of dollars, but millions of dollars.
Do you want to expand this moratorium to the pension funds?
So we have written letters to the Illinois State Board of Investment and to Gombe, calling on them to review their work with Wells Fargo as well. Now, what we're also doing in addition to the investment activity is we're making sure that we're going to conduct an audit of the work they've done. The Illinois Treasurer is in charge of unclaimed property. So when an investment account sits dormant for 5 years, they're supposed to escheat that money to the state so that we can get that money to the rightful owners. We believe that it's possible when they created these new accounts and charged new fees, they believe that might have reset the clock on escheating that money to the state of Illinois. And so that is the other big step we are taking today.
So you said, I'll say, to clarify, you're suspending the $30 billion in investment activity with Wells Fargo. So who's going to be doing it?
So you can go to our website. We believe in transparency. There are about 25 different firms that we do business with, and they're all listed on our website.
And does the $30 billion include, you mentioned they're not going to be a broker-dealer for you for at least a year.
For a year, yes. And we'll review their practices afterwards. We want to make sure that they're putting proper internal controls in place.
I was going to ask you, does that include the existing accounts that are under review?
The existing accounts.
You said all existing are under review?
We have other contracts we have with Wells Fargo under review.
So the millions that Wells Fargo will not be earning, other firms will be earning.
Yes. And we believe that it's important to have strong internal controls in place. What this recent story has shown, and Wells Fargo executives have admitted, is they did not have strong internal controls in place. And if we want to be proper safeguards of our money, we want to make sure the financial institutions we work with have proper internal controls.
When you say other contracts with Wells Fargo are under review, what other contracts does the state have with Wells Fargo?
Yeah, we also have that available on our website, and my Chief Investment Officer, Rodrigo Garcia, who's right next to you, can provide you with those contracts as well. But they are under review. Those are things we're contractually obligated to perform with them. This is the first step we can take today.
What percentage of investments went through Wells Fargo out of those 25 firms that you spoke of?
So in terms of our investment activity over the course of a year is around $1 trillion, and Wells Fargo about $30 billion.
So you know that Wells Fargo received this $30 billion or was responsible for $30 billion, but you're not sure how much the state spent with Wells Fargo. Exactly.
Yeah. So we do not write checks directly to Wells Fargo when we're making these investments. They are the broker-dealer or purchasing, we're buying repurchase agreements and commercial paper through them. They price in some money for them, but that is not explicit in the transactions. And they're the lowest bidder when they have won this in the past. Those other 25 firms will make the market, and we think this is not going to cost the state any additional money.
I'm just wondering how you came to the $30 billion number.
Because that is the amount of financial transactions, investment activities through Wells Fargo between October 1st of last year and September 30th of this year.
Does this affect any bond underwriting at all? Is this any?
This does not, but that is something that will be under review as well. We encourage the Governor's Office of Management and Budget and Illinois State Board of Investment to review their relationships with Wells Fargo as well.
So you have the ability to know how much they're making by looking at all those contracts, but you just don't know right now.
Yeah, I don't have an exact number, but we know it's in the millions of dollars.
And can you explain again the unclaimed property aspect?
Sure. So when a bank holds money for an individual and the account remains dormant for 5 years, they can remain dormant because someone has moved and they've forgotten about it, maybe someone has passed on, the banks don't get to keep that money because no one is claiming it. Our auditors go in and the banks will turn over money to the state, and it's my responsibility as state treasurer to get that money to the rightful owners or their heirs.
And how much are we talking about Wells Fargo has to pay out to consumers in Illinois for that?
Oh, for that, that is something we're going to conduct an audit and see how much is out there.
We don't know.
So it's possible that when they subdivided these accounts, when they opened up new accounts and charged fees, that they said that restarted the clock on that 5 years. So it's potential, there may be millions of dollars that was owed to be turned over to the state, to be given to Illinois residents. They may say they didn't have to because there was activity. Not activity initiated by their customers. And so we're going to send our auditors in and see if there are perhaps millions of dollars more that belongs to Illinois citizens.
Have you spoken?
And this is in line with the other things my office does over the last year in fighting on behalf of consumers, whether it be our settlement we reached with Radio Shack or Sprint, or our actions with life insurance companies in the state of Illinois.
Have you spoken with Wells Fargo executives, and if so, what was that exchange like?
Yeah. We've reached out to them and let them know that we were stopping our investment activity and putting a moratorium in place for a year.
Who did you speak with?
We reached out to 2 different executives, and my chief investment officer actually spoke to them to notify them.
Well, what are their names? What are their names?
My chief executive office, my chief
no,
investment
I mean the
officer.
Wells Fargo executives.
I don't have their names right now.
Thank you, everybody.
Hi, I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. For over 80 years, we've represented the interests of those who work in the Illinois trucking industry. We work with members of the legislature to pass laws to help make the roads safer, to help keep Illinois trucking competitive, and to help provide ongoing educational opportunities for those in our industry. The technology of trucking is forever changing. So too are the laws regulating the trucking industry. That's why the Illinois Trucking Association is proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel, which keeps citizens around Illinois connected to what's happening in state government and what changes are being discussed that will impact their families, their communities, their future. And the Illinois Channel gives those of us in industry an opportunity to share our thoughts on public policy with our fellow citizens across Illinois. I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council on Transportation. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next from Springfield, we talk with Don Schaeffer, the Executive Vice President of Midwest Truckers Association, about a recent trip he made to Cuba, about talks to open up business with the country. Mr. Schaeffer remarks on the country's failing infrastructure and whether Cuba is quite yet ready to accept businesses from states like Illinois. This runs about 25 minutes.
Don Schaeffer, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. One of the things that I think a lot of people have heard about recently, and I've talked to people, and there's a lot of curiosity, is what's going on in Cuba now that Americans can go and visit. And you just came back from a visit there, and we thought we'd want to hear what your impressions are and what kind of struck you. So how long were you there, and let's just get started. What were the impressions that you would share with people?
It was a 9-day trip. I mean, for what we did more than anything else was look at it from an infrastructure, transportation viewpoint. So in other words, what kind of an infrastructure do they have if they're going to be opening the country up to quote unquote capitalism and major development? Are they ready for it? And I think one of the things that we went over there was to be very open about it in terms of, how does it compare to the United States? What are they going to have to do to be able to handle, number one, the capital development, number two, the onslaught of visitors, and number three, to be able to grow in a new economy. And that basically is what the whole intent was of the trip.
And how many people went along on your trip? And I presume they were all trucking executives?
It was about 25 people, and most of them are trucking, transportation-related individuals, all involved in terms of knowing very well, how trucking and logistics work here in the United States, and to take a look and to see how trucking logistics works in Cuba. The bottom line is that they've got a long way to go. I mean, if you really want to condense it, Cuba is a place where someone locked the door about 1958, 59, and walked away from it, and now people are coming back and unlocking the door and going, whoa, we've got a lot to do.
Yeah, one of the most visible things, I think, that we all have that iconic image of the old cars, because you see that on the street. These cars from the 1950s certainly stand out. Tell us a little bit about that, but what else is so dated there that we are not as familiar with?
Well, sure, the cars are everywhere. Tens of thousands of old 1950s and older American cars are, that's the main means of transportation for people. I mean, there's a few in the last year or so, you've seen some Fiats and some Peugeots and still some old junky Russian Ladas running around. But yeah, I mean, the hallmark, of course, is the old cars. But more than anything else, it's not just the cars that are dated, but really the entire infrastructure. The roads haven't been touched. The sewer systems, the power grid, just go on and on. The basic life support system for the entire island needs to be updated. And that is what is happening right now, is that not just the United States, but while we were there, we saw China come in, we saw Japan come in, and sign these trade agreements with Cuba to say, hey, we're going to help you upgrade your power plants, we're going to rebuild refineries, we're going to come up with new ways to develop energy sources so that Cuba can grow and at least move ahead from where they are right now. So there's a lot going on.
I was going to say a lot of people were critical of the President Obama, when he reopened the embassy there and more or less formalized relations, at least from kind of a practical standpoint. I don't know, do you have thoughts on that? Was that a good thing, bad thing?
Well, I think one of the things that we saw, we stayed at the Hotel Nacional, which is a national hotel in Havana. And we stayed there for a couple of days. And while we were there, the Premier of China, Premier Li, and his delegation, we were sharing the hotel with him. So it was quite the sight. But while we were there, and the media was very much, the world media was very highly publicizing around the rest of the world, but not in the United States, the fact that China went in there with the intent of saying, hey, we're going to do all of this because we don't want the Americans coming in and strong-arming Cuba. So in other words, they don't want America coming in there and calling the shots now that the relations have eased between Cuba and the United States. China came in, pretty strong what they were going to do. Japan did the same thing. And other countries are also, they're all lining up to get a piece of the action. I think everyone feels that Cuba now is fair game, that the United States has eased its relationship and is looking to establish more formal relations in the future. It's kind of funny because all this is going on at the Hotel Nacional, which is less than 2 blocks from the U.S. Embassy. And so, it's kind of fun, really, to watch the give and play. But even more so is to see, who's going to do what, because there's so much to do. I mean, this is a country literally that stopped dead in its tracks 60 years ago. And the buildings have collapsed, there isn't a fresh coat of paint on buildings. I mean, just in the last year or so, have we seen improvements in infrastructure in terms of coming back in, rebuilding, shoring up buildings, coming up with plans to move major parts of the economy. It hasn't happened until the last couple of months.
Yeah, I was surprised in talking with you before we began this interview. Obviously, everyone knows that this Cuba is down in the tropics. It's going to be hot. It's going to be humid. And now you were there in the latter part of September, touching into early October. But even then, I think you were saying it was pretty warm down there. What I was surprised at is that you said where you stayed and the people, everyone had air conditioning, which kind of surprised me.
Well, everyone, if you were a tourist, you had air conditioning. Rest of the residents, the people who live there, probably not. Unless, some people who, you could see the air conditioning units, that were in the apartments and stuff like that. Yeah, that was there, but it was not what you would call a common luxury. Half the time the power goes out too. It's not uncommon for the power system to shut down here and there, and the power may be out for an hour, so you eat dinner by candlelight, and then it comes back on. The same thing with in terms of you go into the nicest hotels, and their nicest hotels are probably they would call them 5-star plus. Here we'd call them maybe 4-star, maybe a 3-star hotel. But what's happening is that all of a sudden there are new hotels that are starting to be built, and it's not going to be enough to handle this onslaught. Everyone says, "Oh, we're going to go to we're going to go down to Havana for a weekend, and just to see what it's like." The problem is there are no hotel rooms. They're all gobbled up by these groups like ours that come in and basically take over hotels and those types of facilities.
So if you're going to go, you might need to plan ahead, just because, as you say, the infrastructure for tourism isn't there. And some people might be looking at this and say, why is the Illinois Channel talking about Cuba? And I would say it was George Ryan, the governor of Illinois, one of the first American leaders to go down there, and it was around the year 2000 or so, and maybe 1999. And the point is, he brought with him some people, I think, from ADM and some other industries, representatives from Illinois. With all that needs to be done, there will be billions of dollars spent over the next 10, 20 years to rebuild that economy and make all these upgrades that need to be made. And that would mean trade with ADM, the construction of whether it's a Caterpillar or a John Deere or others, and all those improvements. You were saying when I think you saw one of the tour boats that came in, we think of the Carnival Cruise, those big boats coming in, but I think you were mentioning you can't do that right now, again, because they can't handle it.
Well, the problem is that their ports are not set up for it. I mean, the main port, and this is a big infrastructure issue in terms of logistics and that we look at. They're very much in their infancy in terms of how are you going to distribute goods and services. Right now, most of their economy is basically a local economy. You grow something in the district and you consume it in the district. Big manufacturing, you don't see big manufacturing. Of course, you've got a national brewery. You've got you got
the cigars that are still made by hand.
They're all made by hand. I mean, and still those are, and that's very local. That is all a very local business. It's not a national big-time business. So
I was going to say, as you were saying, we talked about the cars being like a 1950s economy. But really, so much of the economy might be more like an 1890s economy. Huh?
Well, the problem is it is correct. I mean, in the United States, we're used to seeing the big ships come in, loaded with intermodal containers from China, and then they drop everything down, and then they into a harbor, at a port, and then at that port they break them down, and then they send them out to different areas of the region. They aren't set up that way. They don't have the facilities to set that up, but that's what they're trying to do. One of the places is the Port of Mariel. Port of Mariel, it would be that type of situation where the ships could come in and that they would be able to, at that point, break down the loads that would come in, and a key part of their economy would be how to get these goods and services out to people. You've got a container full of appliances. Well, right now, the problem is you don't have a way to break that down and to get that distribution system, set up like we do here in the United States. Now, when we're talking about cruise ships, the problem is that the main cruise ship terminal, which would be in Havana Harbor, is not set up for that at all. It can handle maybe one cruise ship right now, and up until now, the cruise ships have not gone to Havana because of the fact that the maritime laws that the United States had set up had basically said that if you're an American cruise line or you're a cruise line that goes to an American port, if you go to a Cuban port, then you're banned from coming into the United States. So most of the cruise lines have not made Cuba a stop on their itinerary. Well, those laws are going to ease up, but the problem is that the cruise lines have no place to dock their ships. So the Cuban government right now is undertaking a major project, and that's to turn that Havana Harbor is to, number one, get the military ships out of there, number two, relocate the national refinery, which is right there in the harbor, and to move all that out of there so that they can basically deepen the port and take cruise ships.
It's really a different mindset when you were just saying that. I mean, of how to build an economy, one where you have to have nice places to stay, nice places to eat, right. Accommodate these people that are going to come into your country and spend money, whereas it seems like their current economy has been based merely on functionality.
And this is so true because of the fact is that they'll come back and say, well, what if the big cruise ship came in and they unload a couple thousand passengers? What are they going to do? They may eat at a restaurant, but no one is set up for that many people in Havana or in any other port in Cuba for that many people at one time. I mean, they don't have the trinkets, the gift shops. They have museums. You can go to the Museum of the Revolution. You can go, tour the Capitol, and you can go to a flea market and those types of things. But they don't have the large scale diversions that you would have on any other cruise ship port. You can go to New Orleans, you can go to bars, restaurants, gift shops all day, and that's no problem. Cuba's just not set up for that.
What would you say, before we go on to a different topic, what would you say to Governor Rauner or other leaders? We mentioned ADM, some of them went down in 1999 or so. Should Governor Rauner plan a trip down there? Should Illinois industrialists be going down there and trying to get their foot in the door and take a look for themselves and start making plans of how they might be able to grow? I mean, we talk about growing the Illinois economy to fix our deficit. Is Cuba ripe for trade missions from Illinois that they should be going down there and engaging the Cubans?
Well, Illinois is very active in that, and they did that several times back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. The big thing was to open up agricultural markets into a place like Cuba. Illinois and former Governor Ryan were pretty ahead of the game, I think is the best way to put it back then, to take trade delegations to Cuba. At this stage of the game, I think that anyone would tell you, if you look at the rationing that goes on in Cuba right now, the things that are rationed, obviously there's opportunities there. The question is the infrastructure there to handle those opportunities? Sure, we can, we didn't see, John Deere tractors. We didn't see Caterpillar tractors. We saw some old Russian tractors. We didn't see many semis. We saw mostly smaller trucks that were, that are kind of geared up to work around a local area. They just aren't set up yet for this large-scale distribution system.
So even if you had something unloaded, they probably don't have many forklifts even, little things like that, they might be unloading things by hand still. Right?
Oh, sure. Lots of it's human labor. I mean, it's interesting to watch, the local, where they kind of handed out the rice rations and someone, you get a 50-pound bag of rice, you get, maybe they've got cans of tomatoes this month, or they've got, chicken or something like that. But I mean, the problem is that it's still, it's still an economy that it's just waking up. I don't think they're geared up yet to say, hey, everybody come on in, and we're going to jump ahead to the 21st century. They aren't there yet.
Did you have a chance to talk with any government officials and just share some of your thoughts about, interacting with them and the growth of Cuba?
Well, the interesting part was that we met with a lot of people. We met with a lot of economic development people in terms of local economies, those types of things. It was interesting how our meetings, that were set up were always shuffled this way or that way. So, especially with the Port of Mariel, we had meetings scheduled and they kept postponing them or changing the dates, those types of things. I don't think we would have gotten much out of those meetings. We got more meetings out of meeting with the local business people. The local business people were very point blank in terms of telling us straightforward, here's our issues, this is what we're dealing with in terms of getting this or getting that, how do we move this, how do we move that, these are the problems. The transportation people that were not government people, but were transportation people, were very, very straightforward with us in terms of the issues that they deal with. And actually, it was kind of funny because they've got a lot of the same problems we have in terms of, how do we deal with bad road conditions? How do we deal with, regulations? The government regulations that says this or that. The best part had to be is talking to truck drivers at these companies, and they would show us their Cuban commercial driver's license, and they started saying, well, we can only do this, we can only do that, and our guys who were on the trip said, hey, it's no different in the United States. So you're dealing with a lot of the same issues that we are. So from that standpoint, I think we got a lot more out of it, even though we kind of got shuffled around a lot with the Cuban officials. We got a lot out of the people that we did speak to. And the local government officials were interesting.
And I want to go on to another issue, but the last question on Cuba. So how were you received by the people?
They were the friendliest people in the world. I mean, they loved talking to Americans. They pick your brain. What's like this? What's like that? They ask you, what do you think of our country? And here's the thing. I mean, from a standpoint that people are going to say, well, if you're going to go to Cuba, you're going to starve. Absolutely not. I mean, there is, a couple key things to remember. Number one, they're the most educated. Everyone is mandated to, to go through grade 12 in Cuba. So everyone is educated. Number one. Number two, their biggest export are their people, especially doctors in the medical professions. The biggest export that they have. Number three, their food. Their food is we ate like kings. I mean, they have no pesticides, they have no fertilizer, so everything they eat is natural, and
it's all organic because it has to be.
It has to be. The biggest, the liquid gold to them is the manure from the animals, and but their pork is heritage pork. I mean, it's old strains of pork that they don't have any antibiotics in them. They have no chemicals, no drugs in them or anything like that. And so between that, the seafood, the chicken, and all the fresh vegetables that we ate more than we could handle. And of course, there's rum and there's beer too. But I mean,
and cigars,
and a lot of cigars. As the economy transitions in Cuba, what has happened is that they encourage small businesses to start up. The biggest thing that has started up are small restaurants, and they're called paladars. Paladars are basically restaurants that are set up in people's homes, or they set them up in some other location. They may be 5, 6, 7 tables at the most, but everything is and it's all cooked right there. Everything is fresh, and the food's amazing. And of course, they're very proud of what they serve. They serve you a lot of food. It's healthy. Never saw a fast food restaurant. Didn't see a McDonald's the whole time or anything like that. And
can you drink the water there? Or?
No, you don't drink the water. You drink a lot of bottled water, but even the locals don't drink the water. The water's good for flushing and just about maybe bathing, but that's about it. But this is the seeds of what's happening are these is that the government's saying, for the farmers, you're still growing for the government, but you keep 10%. What you do with your 10% is up to you. So like the tobacco farmers, 10% of the tobacco, they come back and they roll their own cigars and they sell their cigars. And they're, it's basically the same tobacco and the same cigar that you're going to spend maybe $20 for a cigar, here in the States, you're going to spend $1, maybe $1.50 for it, in Cuba. And but it's just, it's such a land of contrast, because you see these old buildings that are maybe 200 to 150 years old that have weathered quite a storm the last 60 years, and right next to it new cranes are going up because all of a sudden they're going to see this mass explosion, a new building going out, especially in areas like Old Havana and in that area. The hotels that were built by the mob back in the 50s, they were taken over by the government. Well, these a lot of these hotels, they're showing their age, but at the same time, then in the background you see there's a new structure going up, or they're going to take an older structure and they're going to remodel and turn it into a boutique hotel. So from that standpoint, it's the wheels are in motion and it's moving very quickly. So if someone's thinking about going to Cuba, unfortunately, you still cannot go just as a tourist. You've got to go with an organized group. You've got to go on a people-to-people mission, professional awareness, business-to-business tour, or an educational religious tour. 4 areas that you can go. And until that loosens up, you still got to go with those types of groups. But everyone's going to say in the next year, it's probably going to change just as much as it has in this past year, which they say has been phenomenal.
Next from Springfield, U.S. Representative Rodney Davis talks about the need to update mass transit in the capital city as well as throughout Illinois. This runs about 20 minutes.
First off, I'm glad to be joined by the folks from Springfield Mass Transit District here at their transit center. This is, obviously a temporary transit center because long-term and a project that I'm glad I've worked with city leaders and mass transit district leaders and county leaders on to hopefully move this transit center and a multimodal facility closer to 10th Street to see Springfield's long-term vision come to fruition, to have a multimodal bus and rail facility on the between the 9th and 10th Street corridors. But I'm here today to talk about the importance of mass transit. Mass transit matters in my congressional district. I go to Washington, D.C., and they don't think somebody who represents a district in the midst of cornfields and soybean fields is too concerned about mass transit. But with 4 public universities in my district and many mini urban areas like Springfield, when you look at Springfield compared to larger metropolitan areas, mass transit is important. It's important for many people in our communities to go get to their workplace. It's important for students to get home and go actually pursue higher educational goals. So I'm proud to have been one of the leaders in Washington in passing a long-term transportation bill. It's something that I actually campaigned on the first time that I ran for office. It wasn't a very popular position to take, to say we needed to invest more in infrastructure, more in mass transit, more in transportation. But I'm glad that we were able to pass the first long-term transportation bill in 10 years just last year. And what does that mean for the Springfield Mass Transit District? It means a stable source of funding that they can go after on a regular basis and a competitive basis to actually help increase opportunities for better buses, newer buses, and better facilities. These are why federal investments in mass transit are important to communities like Springfield, and also the places I visited the last few days reiterated that. I was in Champaign earlier today with the Champaign Mass Transit District, and I was also in Bloomington yesterday with Connect Transit, and we saw what they were doing in those communities to help build out their mass transit network so that they could continue to grow opportunities, economic growth, and also grow the number of students that our universities could handle, which in turn gives us a chance to recruit the best and the brightest right here in Illinois. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Isn't it the case that the Republican platform at the convention said that that gas tax money or transportation money should go less to mass transit and more to highways because that's just a big city thing?
Well, it's the same surprise that people have when they find out I represent a district where mass transit's so important. And as you know, Bernie, I don't agree with anybody 100% of the time, even the platform of the Republican Party, which I've never read.
How much does Springfield Mass Transit District get a year in federal funding? Do we happen to know?
I don't have the exact answer. Frank?
It depends right now based on certain criteria that are calculated every year, so it varies.
Is it like 900,000 or a million? Or
it's about 900, I think, Bernie.
About
but
900?
We can verify,
Okay.
but sometimes it goes down a touch or up a touch, depending if we meet certain criteria on ridership.
Well, the good news is, too, we have a stable funding source for 5 years, which many mass transit districts have not had over the life of the last long-term or short-term transportation bill. But I do know, after meeting with the folks here, there's right now $6.7 million in federal funds that are being spent on projects within Springfield Mass Transit District.
Should we be looking?
What do you think about the constitutional amendment that voters will have for transport to make the state funds go directly for transportation, not be swept?
Well, I don't know enough about the amendment to make a decision right now, but I'm looking forward to talking with those who are for and anybody who may be against to talk about what's best.
So you haven't voted yet?
No.
Okay.
Have you?
Not yet. I love election day voting, but that's just a thing. Just to clear up something from the past, you have said...
Let's do mass transit
Sure,
stuff
okay.
first,
Okay.
and then we'll go do the rest.
We're going to talk to you on the bus. So.
Okay, you got me on the bus?
Okay.
You Springfield Mass Transit, do you guys have a position on the constitutional amendment? I mean, the trucking people would say that to the extent that cities around Illinois get some of this funds, it will be guaranteeing that the cities will get it instead of it being swept by the state.
We'll evaluate it on its merits and read the whole bill.
You haven't done that as yet?
Not at this point, no.
Well, the idea is you couldn't spend transportation money on anything else.
But we'll review it.
It's pretty tough, I think, for a public agency to take a position on a ballot initiative, too.
Okay.
How much money do you get from the state, do you know?
This year's budget's approximately...
Can you move most closer to his microphone?
I'm sorry. This year's budget's approximately $16 million worth of downstate operating assistance program money through the state.
And have you had problems with funds being swept by the state to where you don't get your what you had budgeted for?
Not at this point, but we're always in fear that that day could happen at any time. Currently, the district receives 65% funding reimbursement through the state, and we're more worried that it could drop back to, let's say, 55%, and then we would really have to reevaluate everything that we do to ensure that we meet the goals of ensuring transportation for our ridership.
If you had the money...
Maintaining our ridership, I'm sorry.
If you had the money that you would like to have, what are your priorities? Is it just more buses? Are you going to do something aside from buses? What would we gain?
If you're asking about in a perfect world, funding would be, if we had funding that we wanted and said, this is the amount, pardon me, let me start again.
If you could fulfill your strategic plan, what would it be?
It would begin with service that we have currently right now, Monday through Friday night till midnight. We would, through Saturday night, which we just started a couple weeks ago. We would then extend service into Sundays and increase the routes that the buses have and frequency of the routes.
How's your fleet? Is it aging?
Our fleet needs to be updated. We're hoping for funding to update the fleet with new additional buses. However, a bus is $400,000, and it takes a lot of money to buy just one alone. And we would love to have about 20 of them.
And Congressman, as you look at your whole district, it's not just Springfield, obviously. What are the needs in other cities that you're hearing from other members of the mass transit family?
Well, they want certainty. They want opportunities to have not only their formula funds that come on an annual basis, but the opportunity to compete against other communities for some other priorities that they may have within their district. That's a common theme, and the good thing is we gave mass transit districts a lot more certainty than they've had over the last 10 years by passing our long-term transportation bill, the FAST Act, in a very bipartisan way. These are the things that I went to Washington to do, to legislate, to work with both sides, to actually get things done and allow our local entities like the Springfield Mass Transit District to have that certainty that they've come to me asking for in the past.
Do you see this, I don't mean to dominate here, but do you see this
Sure you don't.
mass transit, how does it fit into the broader scheme of turning Illinois' budget around and economic development?
Well, I don't know how it's going to fit into the scheme of how the state of Illinois is going to turn around their issues. But what I can tell you is to have economic growth in communities like Springfield, mass transit is a must for folks who are trying to go find that job that's going to lead to a career and get them out into the community to achieve their dream, their American dream.
These millennials, a big chunk of them who don't want to have a car, kids who turn 16 don't care about getting a license. How does that fit into this conversation?
Well, it's sure not my kids. They've stolen my truck from me. I go outside my garage and realize I don't have a car some days because my twin boys have overtaken my vehicle. That's something that, especially as communities continue to grow in urban areas, we've seen that phenomenon. And I bet it would come to communities like Springfield. So that's why we need to invest in mass transit opportunities now. But it's also not just for a certain generation. It's for those who are trying to build a new career, build a new life, get that job that they've always dreamed of, and they may not have the ability to have multiple vehicles in their household. That's why what we do here today, standing here at the Transit Center, is so important to their success and their ability to achieve their dreams.
Should we look with any sort of jaundiced eye at the fact that the congressman who's up for election in about 5 weeks is traveling around riding on buses in various cities and dragging out local officials to be with him at this time? Isn't it a little campaign ad-ish?
No, because because the campaign season happens doesn't mean I stop doing my job. And anybody that knows me knows that I've always been interested in highlighting the benefits of transportation in my district. So this isn't anything out of the ordinary for me. And frankly, as I look around at everybody who's standing here, it shouldn't be out of the ordinary for any of you to hear me talk about this.
We always love to hear you talk. Now, has the Ag Advisory Committee to Mr. Trump met yet?
Not that I know of.
Okay, so you're on it, but you haven't been asked to advise yet.
Nope.
Okay. The revelation that he apparently took a $900+ million deduction one year and possibly didn't pay taxes for a number of years after that, does that I shake your confidence in your candidate at all for someone who hasn't, perhaps some might say, not done his part, or has he done his part by taking the deduction?
I think as you've seen polling, both candidates have the highest unfavorable ratings of any presidential candidates in our nation's history since polling began. So I think we could probably stand here for hours and talk about the deficiencies of both candidates, but the voters are the ones who chose those candidates. I didn't choose those candidates. I voted for somebody else. I endorsed Marco Rubio for president. So the voters, your readers, their viewers, their listeners are the ones who chose the two presidential candidates, and now it's up to us as voters to choose who's going to do the best job.
And you're voting for Trump?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
What did you think of the VP debate?
Oh, I thought Mike Pence was amazing. I thought Mike Pence showed America why he was chosen to be vice president, why, and if we saw a disaster where the vice president needed to replace a president, why Mike Pence could easily step into that office. He's somebody who showed the American people last night that he has the common sense that we need in America right now, and he's going to make a great vice president.
Flip the Ticket was trending last night after the debate. Do you think that Mike Pence outshined the actual nominee?
Well, the voters didn't get a chance to choose Mike Pence. The voters are the ones who chose our two candidates.
And what effect does the vice presidential debate have in the whole process overall? Does it move a point or two or less, or can you tell?
History shows us it really doesn't matter. I mean, look, I was a freshman in college when Lloyd Benson delivered that just hit on Dan Quayle, but Lloyd Benson was never the vice president. Dan Quayle was.
Okay. Really quick question.
Let me ask you, can you update us on the WOTUS and the effort to get some funds to rebuild those locks and dams?
Well, WOTUS is different than the funds to rebuild the locks and dams. WOTUS,
sorry,
WOTUS is, we're still trying to fight that overreach by this administration. But the Obama administration is dead set on pushing through rules in the regulatory environment that can cost taxpayers billions. And they want to do it on their way out because they weren't successful at the ballot box, and they don't want to run it through Congress because they know our common sense approach is not going to jive with their ability to actually repay political favors to those who put them in office. And that's exactly what this WOTUS rule is.
Can you explain it for those who don't know?
So Waters of the U.S. rule, which I believe and evidence, in my opinion, clearly shows, is an overreach into even drainage ditches in neighborhoods that could impact so many in our community. EPA does not need to be the watchdog of every raindrop that falls into our gutters in our subdivisions and neighborhoods, and that's exactly what they're trying to do. Now, when it comes to locks and dams, we're working on, we just passed another WRDA bill. We got back on our 2-year track. Remember, it was from 2006, 2007, the last time we had a long-term water infrastructure bill. And just like we talk about mass transit and highways and bridges in our highway bill, we have to have that same language for our water highways. Look at the navigation channel along the Mississippi and the Illinois waterways as our highways to get products out into the global marketplace. And we passed that bill just last week, and we're going to continue to push for new and innovative approaches to help fund our lock and dam improvements, which have gone nowhere in the last 20 years with the status quo. One amendment I had actually would allow the Comptroller General to study new ways to help implement the Inland Waterway Trust Fund, which is crucial to upgrading our system.
Any funds attached to WRDA yet?
Well, that's authorizing language. Remember, we are an authorizing committee on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. The Appropriations Committee has to match up the money. That's the way Congress operates. So we put the authorizing language in place. We think it saves taxpayers billions of dollars and also pinpoints where our priorities need to be. But it's the president who hasn't prioritized upgrading the locks and dams along the Mississippi and Illinois rivers. He has zeroed out funding in that category called NESP that would actually move that project along. So his priority has been to do nothing along our corridors. My priority is to do everything, do what they were promised they were going to do 20 years ago.
Any thoughts on getting the conversation going on the Farm Bill?
Oh, we're beginning that debate too. Now we're at the stage where the Farm Bill policies that we put in place that saved $23 billion in mandatory spending just a few short years ago. I will remind folks that was the largest single spending cut in mandatory spending we had my entire first term in Congress. That bill is now being implemented, and we're beginning the discussions on what may be deficient, what USDA may be doing well. And I actually want to give Tom Vilsack, our Secretary of Ag, a lot of credit in working with us. He's somebody who has shown a determination to work with Congress, and I think that shows why the USDA has been a very successful agency.
Just any thoughts, and I'll shut up for good, just on other ag issues, any frustration that you don't really hear about in the presidential race at all at this point, it seems.
You know, the fact that we don't hear about ag a lot, I think shows that we've actually solved many of the issues that were part of the debate when I first ran for Congress 3.5 short years ago. So that's a good sign when the presidential race is not talking about it. But the presidential race clearly has been focusing on the failures of this administration, the foreign policy level, and also with anemic economic growth.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Anyone who drives across Illinois will guess that agriculture is our #1 industry. In fact, agriculture accounts for 1 in 7 jobs in the state of Illinois, and the grain and feed industry contributes over $10 billion annually to the state's economy. Hi, I'm Jeff Adkisson, Executive Vice President of the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois. The fields of corn and soybeans and grain elevators and feed mills that dot our landscape are all part of a vast interconnected system of commerce that employ tens and thousands of your fellow citizens. But like most businessmen, our members are concerned with issues such as taxes, government regulations, fuel costs, and environmental concerns. That's why the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois works to communicate our concerns on those issues to the people in government who write our laws. With so many jobs at stake, it's important for us to keep the lines of communication open between those in agriculture and those in government. That's also why the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois supports the work of the Illinois Channel. Its coverage connects all of us to events at the state capitol, like coverage of the Senate and the House Agriculture Committee hearings, as well as other public policy events that occur throughout the state of Illinois. We all need to stay connected to the events and the issues in Illinois, whether we live in the rural communities or in our largest cities. And that's what we get from the Illinois Channel. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next from Springfield, we talked to Don Schaeffer, Executive Vice President of the Midwest Truckers Association, about a constitutional amendment that will be on the November ballot, ensuring that funds designated for improving transportation infrastructure are solely directed toward those purposes. This runs about 15 minutes.
Voters will see on the November ballot not just the list of candidates, but they're going to vote on a constitutional amendment that would require the state of Illinois, when they collect money that's designated for the roads, for that money to actually be spent on the roads. People may or may not be aware that the government has been dipping into the road fund, kind of like reaching into the cookie jar, to use that money to cover costs in other areas. And this amendment would require the government to spend that money just for the roads, and the quick taking that, they use the word sweep. As truckers, I presume you're for it, and tell us why it would make a difference.
You know, the Safe Roads Amendment is an issue that we as an industry have been pushing for years. Our big concern has been the sweep of this money from the road funds that has been going on for decades. But it's really gotten bad in the last dozen years or so, where we've seen, $500 million on average a year, money that motorists pay in motor fuel taxes, vehicle registration fees, money that should go for highway construction and repair, for transit, for key transportation projects, has been swept away and used for other purposes in state government. We call it has been swept into that big black hole of government, never to be seen again. So really, the motorists are the ones who have been cheated. And that's why the Safe Roads Amendment, which we call Truth in Taxation Amendment, basically says if I'm going to pay motor fuel tax, if I'm going to pay vehicle registration fees, and that money is supposed to be going for highway construction and repair and transportation purposes, then by golly, let's pass this amendment and make sure it does. Wisconsin has passed a similar amendment. Missouri has passed a similar amendment. Both states were in the same boat as Illinois. What's happened in both of those states? We've seen a dramatic improvement in infrastructure in terms of what's happened in Wisconsin and Missouri. The same thing can happen in Illinois, too, if we pass this amendment.
And obviously that would help in job creation in the construction field, and I don't like that trickle, but the economy works like dominoes, and so when you get one thing, it leads to another, just as we were talking about in Cuba. I mean, when you spend money, and we are talking about billions of dollars that would go back in. In fact, just coincidentally, I came upon an old press conference from the Rod Blagojevich days by the Republicans who were complaining back in 2004 and 5 about the billions of dollars. I think the number was $4.3 billion in that press release. Way back then. So when you look at the cumulative impact of those funds being swept, it's not a small amount of money that we're talking about in 1 year, and certainly not over the last 10 years. That would be tens of billions of dollars, most likely. I don't know the actual number that would have, over that period of time, would have gone into road construction. Right?
Sure, and there's been criticism of this going back to the Jim Thompson days. I mean, supposedly the Rose Garden and the Executive Mansion. I mean, they took money out of the road fund to build the Rose Garden. I mean, and those types of things that just showed that the quote-unquote sacredness of the road funds has been, denigrated over the years. And a lot of people are saying, well, this amendment, basically, it's an amendment that it's for special interests. It's not for special interests. It's for the motoring public. They're the ones who have spent the money. They should be getting something out of it. And people always complain, well, Illinois roads, they stink. Well, the problem is because we're siphoning away $500 million a year. Money that could be used to fix these roads, but instead it's going for something else. And so why not pass an amendment that holds the state's feet to the fire, that says, yeah, we're going to use this money for transportation and nothing else. Why not? I mean, if it works in other states, and it has worked in other states. This has been passed not in just 2 or 3 states. Dozens of states around the country all do the same thing. They hold the sacredness of that money for that specific purpose. So why shouldn't Illinois?
Let me ask you a couple of problems. When we say transportation, would it go literally to roads? Illinois needs to rebuild, speaking of exporting grain, or locks and dams. Illinois would have to come up with some of the money. The feds would come up with some of the money.
Sure.
That's transportation, but it may not be roads. Could it be used for that? Would it be used for things that are, would it be strictly highways and bridges, or anything that has to do with the transportation infrastructure?
And so you got to remember, transportation funding goes for a wide number of purposes. It trickles down into local units of government also. So the local units of government would benefit from this also, because they get a certain amount. And sure, we talk farm to market. We're talking about river ports. We're talking about local roads that need improvement. All these, and it's not just your interstate highways. This isn't just an interstate highway issue. This is getting down to your local roads and streets. The money that local governments get also comes out of that same pot, and they depend on a portion of the motor fuel tax proceeds. That goes to local government. If you look at the distribution formula, so much goes upstate, so much goes downstate, so much goes to local government, so much goes to state government. So they divvy up that pie. It's an established formula. So if we preserve that money, then each piece of that pie is going to get more.
Lastly, what would you say, and I'm just looking for people that might criticize it, they might say, let's say Governor Rauner, there was a problem with the state budget before he became governor. And here you would be tying, not just to make Governor Rauner, but you would tie the hands of the governor, whoever that is, to be able to use the money where it's most critically needed. And so with this amendment, we might we would be forced to spend it on transportation when maybe there's a critical need, buying new cars for the state police or whatever.
Well, when you bring up cars for the state police, there's money that's already been dedicated to buying new cars for state police, for example. I mean, it's...
Well, I don't want to make it just about that. I'm just... in other words, there might be some other critical need. The point is, should we be tying the hands of those who are hired to be the managers of the state by saying you cannot use these funds?
Well, and I do like to answer that question, though, on the CDL issue, because, on the state police cars, because every truck driver pays a surcharge on his commercial driver's license, and that money's supposed to go to buy new state cop cars. You know what happened to that money? It got swept. So, that just goes to show that truth in taxation, we have all these grand plans. We say we're going to do this, do that, do that. Well, we make a mockery of it then when, if the legislature is going to create a program, they should be able to say at the same time, well, if we're going to create a program, then we better have the money to fund it. And I dare say that in the last, 10 years, after we have swept $6 billion out of the road fund, how many programs have been created that have necessitated the sweeping of that money? I think maybe there's a little discipline that's lacking in terms of how we spend our state revenues. And, and to say, are we in a mess right now because of a lack of discipline? I think so. And I think that, should the motorists be the ones to pay the penalty? Or should not just motorists? Now, you got to remember also is that mass transit riders would benefit from this also, because the money goes to subsidize mass transit. And that affects Chicago. That affects downstate. It affects rural transits. And
some going to airports?
Well, if the airports get a portion of funding under the transportation plan, there'd be money there. There's money probably for riverports also. So, it's a big pie. But the whole pie has been swept over, for years and years and years.
And I believe that needs a 2/3 vote for passage.
It needs a supermajority vote of those who are voting, and which is crucial. And at this stage of the game, a lot of people are saying, well, this is all we're doing is taking care of special interest with this thing. It's saying, well, all it's doing is just, it's a jobs bill, or it's going to keep, it's going to keep these, road programs going, or it's going to, it's going to do this and that. In all truth, no, that's not what it's going to do. It's going to put safer roads out there for people, and it's going to make the roads, better. To do that, you have to have people who are going to do the work.
Well, and anyone driving in any number of our cities, certainly trying to get in and out of Chicago in the afternoon, know the traffic jams that they're in. And as populations grow, if the road structure doesn't, obviously you have massive congestion, as we see.
And our problem is that we aren't looking to jump ahead. We're looking to maintain the status quo. Our problem is that we were at a point where we were able to maintain what we had. Now all of a sudden, we're starting to slide again.
I believe I'm right in there's been studies that a number of our bridges are past their lifespan.
Oh, yeah, we've got probably over 4,000 bridges in the state of Illinois that are considered deficient. Now, I'm not saying they're going to cave in, but they're saying these are bridges that need attention. And we don't even bring up the thousands of miles of roadway, which are considered deficient here in Illinois, that need to be upgraded. We've been really good here in Illinois about peeling 2 inches of asphalt off the road and just putting 2 inches back on as a cosmetic repair, when in fact what a lot of our roads need to be they need to go all the way down to the gravel and rebuild. And the problem is that we don't have a road program to do that. We don't have enough money. Our road program is at the same level it was 20 years ago. And if you're talking a $2 billion road program, that's nothing. I mean, that does nothing.
What's the number for construction of a road these days? Do we have a?
It varies, and it's a tough number because how many bridges, what kind of road, what kind of pavement are you going to put down?
But it's some in the millions of dollars per mile.
Oh, easily. And our problem is that we can't even set up a priority list right now because we're too busy patching, doing emergency patches and trying to take care of what we have. And a lot of people come back and say, well, what we'll use is a good example, and I hate to say it, people pay tolls on the Illinois tollway system. The money from the tolls, what does it do? It goes back into the tollway. Doesn't go to state government. It's not used to fund other parts of state government. Where are the best roads in the state of Illinois? The Illinois tollway system. That's because the money's dedicated and it stays right within the system. If we could do that with the rest of the Illinois roadway, we'd have a lot better road system than we have right now.
Don Schaeffer, thanks for joining us.
Glad to do it.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Dan Montgomery, President of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. More than 100,000 IFT members work each day in schools, universities, colleges, and state agencies across Illinois. They're professionals who teach our students, keep our public buildings safe and clean, and provide critical state services, and much more. As an advocate for our members, their professions, and those we serve, the IFT works in Springfield to support legislative policies that promote high-quality schools and public services. We also fight to protect collective bargaining rights for all our members and all working men and women. We do this through an organized program of advocacy and year-round monitoring of public policy proposals. And that's why the IFT is proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel, whose coverage connects us to legislative debates and committee hearings, as well as interviews with leaders on key issues like the state budget, tax policy, public pensions, and education funding. Funding education is one of the primary responsibilities of Illinois state government, so we should all pay attention to the policies being proposed and how they may help or harm our children's futures. What's happening in the State House today directly impacts what happens in classrooms tomorrow. And what happens in classrooms impacts the future of our state and our nation for decades to come. I'm Dan Montgomery, President of the Illinois Federation of Teachers, and I'm proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Education Advisory Board. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us all connected.
Next from Champaign, Illinois Channel correspondent Dr. Allison Jones talks to PhD Norman Paquin about a new school opening at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign that will apparently revolutionize the teaching of medicine. This runs about 10 minutes.
Norman Paquin, thank you for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
My pleasure.
So we're very glad you're able to join us this evening for this educational program for our physicians. And I'd just like for you to have an opportunity to share your history of involvement with the new College of Medicine and your vision for the future with it.
Well, so I am been the project lead for this new College of Medicine for the University of Illinois for about 2.5 years now. Was approached by the provost and the chancellor back then to take on this project because I'd been involved with setting up some major initiatives within the campus in the past. I was glad to accept. I mean, I think this project has been one of the most rewarding ones for me to pursue because it has such potential to change our community, to have such a fundamental impact on medical education. And of course, it also taps into some of my expertise, which is engineering and physics. So it's really been a delight to work on.
That's fantastic to hear. I really wanted to give you a chance too. What type of projects do you currently work on with your engineering background on campus now, and how do you envision those may be incorporated into some work with the new College of Medicine?
Right. Well, so I'm in my official job, I'm an associate director for research in one of our interdisciplinary units within the College of Engineering, called the Coordinated Science Lab. That laboratory specializes on interdisciplinary projects to have meaningful societal impact by leveraging core expertise in information science and technology. And within CSL, we actually have a engineering healthcare systems center, which is looking at the application of robots, simulation, big data, information science to solve medical problems and healthcare problems, to essentially bring, very much like the vision of this college in terms of finding ways of bringing better health outcomes to more people at lower costs. And it's, I think one of the things for me has been the pleasure of learning about some of the research projects that are already underway within our college and elsewhere on campus to pursue those goals. One of the examples I really think about is that we have a professor who is developing some nanotechnology, using nanotechnology to develop ways of testing blood to detect cancer and potentially providing an interface to a cell phone so that these people could do these type of tests at their home when they want to, as opposed to having to go, as they do now, go to a hospital for an exam that requires two very specialized technicians, a $50,000 machine, and then have to wait 2-3 days before you get a result. I mean, those are the type of things that you can sort of see could transform healthcare. We also have other projects which involve the development of advanced telemedicine techniques, professors working with hospitals for our veterans and so on, working with physicians at those hospitals to, again, develop new ways, right? So that when we have veterans like we do here who live 100, 200 miles away from a veterans hospital, that they can actually get a very high degree of high quality care by simply being able to interface through, really truly immersive telemedicine capabilities, which don't exist right now, but that's what we're all about, right? The university is all about looking to the future and trying to break barriers to make things better. And this is one way that we're going to be doing this through this college.
That's fantastic. One of the other questions that I had was, we have a very strong physician community here that's been involved with the previous, or with the current, but being phased out College of Medicine in Chicago, University of Illinois, and we have a fantastic tradition. How do you envision physicians, leaders, and clinicians in our community and researchers being involved with the new College of Medicine? Because we would really like to be involved with the advocacy part, and many of us are connected in Washington and on very high-level committees within our specialties. How do you see us being able to be involved to support your efforts and work and in collaboration?
Right. So there's many facets to this. One, I should thank actually the physicians who are involved with the existing college and the dedication to making sure that the students that are in that college are really well taken care of and are able to complete the degrees as planned and as they aspire to. I think that's a tremendous commitment. I think it shows, and I know it's not only the physicians in the community, but also our faculty in the university and also at the University of Illinois Chicago. So that's very much appreciated. In my mind, this college has, when you think about where it wants to go, I think, and in terms of the number of students that are likely to be involved, but also the potential for, I would say, an outsized research effort compared to, say, just the pure number of students involved, that there's going to be tremendous opportunities to partner with the community and the physicians to expose them to that. I also tend to think that, it's one of these things where I have to believe that the college will draw from the excellence in community, if only because we're going to want to give the students the best possible opportunity to learn and to learn from the best. So to the extent that talent's out there, we're going to aim to reach for it. Yeah.
So that's fantastic. I really appreciate your involvement and dedication to this visionary college. And any other remarks you'd like to make?
Well, I'll just say as you know, today was the announcement of the Board of Trustees' approval for our new founding dean, Dr. King Lee. I've had a chance to interact with him a number of times. I'm terribly impressed with him. I mean, he's very impressed with him. I think he's going to be fantastic for the college. I'm really looking forward to seeing him here and actually interacting with the community.
Yes, we're very much looking forward to it. It was a great day and wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and information with our team.
Thank you very much.